Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's lunchtime series. My name is Shaohai Jiang. I'm an assistant professor from the Department of Communications and the New Media. So today, I'm very happy to invite our speaker, Professor Samsung Lin, to give a talk entitled Transcendent Parenting in Asia's Digitally Connected Families. So before her talk, let me give you a brief introduction about her background. Professor Samsung Lin is the Professor of Communication and Technology and the Head of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences at the Singapore University of Technology and Design. She has extensively researched the social impact of technology, focusing on technology domestication, digital disruptions, and smart city technologies. She recently published Transcendent Parenting, Raising Children in the Digital Age, Oxford University Press 2020, and also co-edited the Oxford Handbook of Mobile Communication and Society, Oxford University Press 2020. She serves on 11 journal editorial boards. From 2018 to 2020, she was a nominated member of the 13th Parliament of Singapore. She was also named to the inaugural Singapore 100 Women in Tech list in 2020 for her pioneering work on the social impact of technology. She frequently offers her expert commentary in diverse outlets, including Nature, Scientific American, Channel News Asia, Business Times, and the Straits Times. So next, let's welcome Professor Samsung Lin for her talk.
Hi there, everyone. Very good afternoon to you. Welcome to my talk. Big thank you to Shaohai for kindly introducing me. And before the talk, it was very joyful for me to actually reconnect with Shaohai and my former department, Communications and New Media, which is where I grew up as an academic. So it's also very nice to come back to CFPR. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank the Center for Family and Population Research, because it was their research development grants back in the day that allowed me to fund some of the preliminary field work that would give birth to this book, Transcendent Parenting. So it's really nice to come home in so many ways, and I'm really glad to have this opportunity to share with you my work, which really also talks about the home, and it talks about how technology has infused the home in so many ways and has created this phenomenon of what I call transcendent parenting. So just to first give you that understanding of my book, it basically was in many ways based on fresh field work, but was also a culmination of all my years of work on technology domestication. So when I returned to Singapore after my PhD in the UK, this was in 2003, I was really quite stunned to return to a country that was quite unrecognizable. Before I left, you know, we hadn't seen so many mobile phones. When I returned, there was a huge proliferation of mobile phones. Broadband internet was really taking off, and you could see how family communication was being transformed in many ways. So as a young academic coming back, I thought to myself, you know, this is really something that I should be studying. I really need to understand what's happening to this society that I live in, how technology is really sort of making its presence felt in the homestead. So that was how I began my journey on researching into technology domestication. And just to give you a more sort of targeted understanding of the thrust of my book, I was really motivated to understand how mobile media is being used in parenting. Now, when you look at a lot of research out there, there is research that's being done on how mobile communication is being used in various realms. You're also looking at, you know, mobile education platforms and their impact on children and so on. But I felt that one missing part of the equation was really to understand the impact it was having on parents and on the practice of parenting. And so my own autobiographical journey also as a parent of 2 children was I was also seeing mobile communication playing a much more important role in how I performed my role as a mother. And so together with the personal interest, together with that whole intersection of all of my previous work, I really wanted to find out just how parenting is responsible to this growing incursion of mobile media into everyday life and into family routines. So just to give you a broader sense of the sociological landscape around trends in parenting, and particularly also to situate it within Asia, it's useful to actually get a sense of how Asian parenting manifests itself and what are some sorts of distinctive characteristics that have been identified about parents in Asia or about parenting practices in Asia. So when I delved into this, it was really very eye-opening for me because I thought that some things I did were, idiosyncratic or reflective of my parents. But in fact, you can see a lot of trends across many Asian societies that reflect these kinds of practices, right? So a lot of research has been able to establish that Asian parents tend to set very lofty educational goals for their children, and they have very high expectations for the amount of effort the children should put in. So, Chinese parents, Asian parents are very often known to be telling their children to study harder, study for longer, sign them up for all kinds of enrichment classes and so on. And that very much is one of the characteristics that sociologists have identified about parenting in Asia. And obviously, all of this is not, for intrinsically motivated, right? It's really geared towards that sort of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is the good grades. Asian parents tend to, want to expect rather good grades, exemplary grades of their children. They want their kids to be top of the class. And again, this also is very much identified and discerned in many Asian societies. And concurrent with this, zeal for education, concurrent with this quest for educational excellence is also the fact that Asia is actually a very technophilic society. We're very optimistic about technology. We're very open to new devices, we're open to new platforms, which is why we have seen, many startups, many unicorns birthed in this region, because generally our region is quite techno-optimistic. So the avid adoption of technology in Asia and the very sort of mobile dominant type media landscape also made me very curious about how mobile communication was changing the parenting equation, if you will. Now, again, talking about parenting priorities, quite apart from what parents want, is also what parents do. And what's interesting is that some of this is not necessarily new. A lot of it is actually based on culture practices that are centuries old, right? That in traditional or ancient Asian civilizations, you would have seen this kind of practice. Again, this was also established by sociological research. So in many Asian societies, there is that sense of the need to actively inculcate positive values in your children. And then at the same time, there is also that presumption that parents have to play a very strong role in terms of safeguarding the child, in terms of exercising very close parental supervision, in terms of being somewhat protective of the child, as compared to, say, some Scandinavian countries where they would be prepared to have the child go freely to a camp at a very tender age. You might not see that often in some Asian societies. So this predisposition, this proclivity towards close parental supervision, towards that protectiveness of children is also one of the hallmarks of many Asian societies. And of course, just to underline the fact that there is also the other priority that I had earlier mentioned, that concerted desire for your children to perform academically. That very much is something that is valorized in many Asian societies. And as a result of this valorization, it translates into a very intense investment of parental resources, whether it is financial resources, whether it's time, whether it's energy, or simply having your whole life revolve around your child and their academic obligations is also something that's very much identified within Asia and within many urban Asian cities. So I'll just sort of warm you up to the whole picture of transcendent parenting and the digital landscape by talking about how the digital has really sort of transformed the educational landscape. And again, this, is an intersection of Asia being a hub for not just very close parental investments, but also being a place where we are very digitally ready, right? We're very technologically optimistic. So in Singapore, for example, which is where most of my fieldwork was based, you'll see that there is increasing use of technology in homeschool conferencing. Now, homeschool conferencing is a very interesting practice in the sense that it basically refers to the communication between the school and the teachers as well as with the parents. And there's actually a lot of work done in the education sector to look at the virtues of homeschool conferencing. Homeschool conferencing is seen to be very beneficial, particularly for children who are struggling in school. They are maybe catching up with their peers. And when schools engage in homeschool conferencing with parents of such children, it can actually help to boost the child's performance. It can actually help the child to adapt better to the challenges of school. And so homeschool conferencing is actually something that is essentially deemed beneficial. Now, what is interesting is that in Singapore, because we have an app for virtually everything, not surprisingly, we also have an app for homeschool conferencing. So this is the one by the Ministry of Education. I think it's called Parents Gateway, and essentially it digitalizes a lot of things. It digitalizes notifications from school. It digitalizes permission slips from teachers that parents need to endorse. It also provides all kinds of things like a calendar for parents so that you know what your child is looking forward to in the next few months, next few weeks, and so on. So essentially, this app helps parents to better manage their children's school-related obligations. Now, besides that app, which is very much administratively centered, you will also find that homeschool conferencing is increasingly encroaching into the academic space, if not actually dominating the homeschool conferencing space. So on the left, you'll see what is called Class Dojo. And what that allows the teacher to do is that it gives the teacher of every class the opportunity to have each child be represented as an avatar. The children can actually choose what their avatar looks like, but as a teacher, I can actually, give like 10 stickers to Xiaohai for good performance, answering my questions and so on. But essentially, teachers can reward their students for good performance, and parents can then track their child's in-school performance through looking at the app. So that's the Class Dojo, that part of it. But in the middle slide, you will see that there's a message from a teacher. This is like a generic message to all parents. And again, these are like reminders from teachers about what's up, what they're teaching in school and so on. So it's rather good from a parenting perspective. I get to know what my child is learning, and then it allows me to better understand what they're being exposed to, how I can support them, and so on. So that's homeschool conferencing in academic performance. But interestingly, beyond just the parents being able to be kept informed, we also find that there is increasing effort or initiatives by teachers to get parents drawn into what I would call educational reinforcement. So the parents are very often sending reminders to, the teachers are very often sending reminders to parents to say, hey, these are the resources you can get your preschool child to watch, because this week we're learning numbers 1 to 10. So you can get them to watch this video, go to this website, get them to do this online activity, and so on. So the one on the left is actually a kindergarten child's parents app, and that is the educational reinforcement that's required even at the preschool level. Now, in the middle is WhatsApp. So what's interesting is that there are the official platforms, the official homeschool conferencing apps, but many teachers although discouraged by the ministry and although discouraged officially by their schools, many teachers will use their personal communication accounts, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's Telegram, and so on, to communicate directly with parents. And teachers will share with you that they think this is efficient. They think this is the best way for them to reach out to parents in the most, with the greatest ease, with the greatest seamlessness, right? So in the middle, you can see a WhatsApp message from a teacher to a parent, where the teacher is asking the parent to monitor the child's classroom behavior. And then also there are screenshots, photographs that she's taken of the child's test, where she would like the mother to help the child, you know, to look into this particular part of the test where he didn't do so well. And then on the right, you'll see another sort of generic notification from teacher to a parent via Class Dojo, and the teacher is basically asking the parents to check on their kids' school bag. Please check your school bag and handbook, remind them to complete their homework, and so on. So there's a great deal of, you know, parents being drawn in as allies of the teachers in helping to support the child's educational journey. So that's educational reinforcement. Going beyond that, you will see that, you know, there's also the whole proliferation of what you would call, or what I call, homework helpers. So parents whose children are struggling with particular subjects, or whose children have reached that critical year of the primary school leaving examination that every child in Singapore takes at the age of 12, you will be amazed by how much support is being offered and provided, or is needed by parents of primary 6 children. So there are all these Facebook groups where parents will be providing support, whether it is helping to tell you which tuition center is really good, or whether it is you taking a photo of a math question that your child simply does not know how to answer, and you totally have no idea how to help him or her. You know, there are all these places where parents can seek help. And there are even platforms like this Ask Many Tutors, where you can actually take screenshots or photos of these homework challenges, and then put them up, and then teachers will actually come and answer. Tuition teachers will actually come and answer these questions. And this obviously isn't entirely altruistic. At the end of it, you know, they hope that you will then sign them on for long-term tuition, right? But what's interesting from the ecosystem is that you see that there are all these ways in which parents can be very involved and very invested in their children's educational journey. So I wanted to share with you the whole issue of how homeschool conferencing can actually be quite stressful for parents. So one parent says, you know, this is one school, but for one school, I have to check 3 apps, because different teachers use different apps, and the math teacher will use this app, and then the form teacher will use this other app for administrative things. And so she says that, you know, she finds that she is inundated with all of these different apps and all of these different notifications, and there is so much to do. And so she says, I wish it was one seamless platform rather than me having to check all 3. And mind you, this mother had 3 children. So you just multiply all those apps, all that notifications, by the number of children and the different schools. So you're looking at a very, very busy plate. So on the right is the slide that I had shown you earlier. But what's interesting about this is that she says, I would like to seek your help with talking to your child about his behavior in class. I have told the details to his grandfather yesterday. So the mother literally has to vicariously accompany the child to school. She has to remind him that when he's in class that he should behave well, and so on. And I just think that compared to, say, when I was a student and I went to school, and then when I came home, I told my parents, my parents asked me, how did you do in school? I'm like, fine. And then, you know, they weren't any the wiser if I was good or if I was naughty. But today, you know, that very intense communication between parents and teachers really results in parents being heavily involved in their children's school days. So then this mother explained how she used this particular resource, right? So what's interesting is that this mother was actually not very keen on her children getting onto so many devices, but because the school, the preschool, asked her to make sure that they expose their children to these online videos to support the kids preschool learning, that she decided to show the kids the videos in the car on the way home from school. And she says the teacher will notify us, so we have a look at it, we put it on the car. It's a short video, so it's not too bad. And the reason she said it's a short video is because she was actually trying to reduce the amount of screen time for her child, but the school is actually encouraging her to get the child onto the screen for various kinds of educational content. So you can see there's a bit of tension there. And then at the same time, you know, there's also the whole business of the schools using digital learning tools. So it's not just about conferencing anymore. It's about the kids actually having to use learning tools. So for example, in this particular situation, the child was having to do homework via Google Classroom. And this mother was saying that, you know, it was a graded piece of homework and her child was not very adept at using the computers. And so she, as the mother, had to take over, right? She had to help the child negotiate the platform, and she had to really, you know, be the one typing in the essay and so on. And so this actually introduces some very interesting questions about parents of different digital skills, how well different kinds of parents are able to support their kids. But essentially, you can see that whole digitalization of the school environment presents some very new challenges for parents of all shapes and sizes, whether it is a tax on your resources or whether it's a tax on your cognitive capacity. It's a very challenging overall, trying environment. So similarly with this family, they were actually not very keen at all on having their child get onto the computer so soon. But what happened was that the school holidays rolled around and the school wanted the kids to do online holiday homework, which was compulsory. And so the parents who were all this while trying to reduce device use, trying to keep the child off the computer for as long as they could, now actually had to sit with him to help him do the online school holiday homework. And so the mother said, sometimes it's tiring for us because we do not have school holidays. So during school holidays, we still have to work and we still have to monitor online homework. So it's interesting how schools are increasingly using digital assessment tools. And then what's interesting also is that with the class dojo, it's not just the parents knowing how the children are doing. The children know that the parents know how they are doing. So the children also get drawn into this whole business of how their performance is being assessed and being communicated to the parents. And so this kid was very curious about his teacher's feedback about him, and he would come home and ask his mom to check on his class dojo so that he could see how his own performance was. And so it's interesting also because it changes that parenting equation, right? That you are wanting to know how well you are doing, but that your parents know how well you are doing in a way that previously was communicated maybe via some printed material and so on. But now virtually it's live every day and it's quite detailed and there's a great deal of quantification. So essentially, when we think about the whole issue of screens in schools, we can see that, like it or not, the broader educational environment demands that parents are exposed to computers and devices, that their kids are exposed to computers and devices. What's also interesting is from the school end, because we have digitalizing platforms, we have digitalization endeavors in schools, that therefore schools and teachers, I think, are also pressured to deliver on pedagogical innovation that involves digital devices. And fundamentally, when we think about homeschool conferencing today, screens, digital screens, play a very important role as a conduit for school-related information. So this then led me to my book, Transcendent Parenting. Why? So why do I call it Transcendent Parenting? Now, essentially, when you talk to parents, and in this case, these were the Singapore parents for my book, you realize that there is a very great sense of duty, responsibility around how they have to be everything for their kids, right? So this mother says, you know, the first thing, I have to feed them physically so that they keep up with their academic learning. And then there are a lot of important dates in my child's calendar, exams, competitions, enrichment classes, whatever. And sometimes things get messed up. Indeed, right? Children's calendars can get very hectic and parents are the ones coordinating all of it. And then the third thing she says, she has to be their tuition teacher. So basically there is this feeling that mothers, parents have to be everything to their kids and have to make sure that the kids' needs are being met from end to end. Now, so this is where the apps actually allow a very interesting degree of involvement. In this particular case, this is Kokolo, which is another app used by some of the preschool of kids whose parents we interviewed. And Kokolo actually will put up all kinds of information, such as even the afternoon lunch menu. So as a parent, I can be fully assured that my child is well nourished in preschool, having chicken porridge with apples and so on. And again, that degree of information, that richness of communication, that full extent of the very deep involvement of parents, you can choose to be very involved if you want to, because all of these communication platforms are in keeping you informed in so many ways about school outings, about holidays, about learning journeys, and so on. Right, checking on the time. So, looking at parenting priorities, I found from the fieldwork that many parents felt that they saw all these technologies as a kind of mixed blessing, because on the one hand, as working parents, they feel like they are distracted from their work when they get notifications from the school, but then at the same time throughout the day they know that if they check their app, they will know what homework is required, and then they can say, oh, I will share with my husband because I will be late, can you please look out for this homework? And she said, without all these apps, I had to call the school and I would have to email and so on. So it was quite a blessing. And so for many parents, they found that these kinds of homeschool conferencing was actually helpful to them. But what it means is that you actually have to transcend all of these different environments that your children are in. And then, of course, the other thing is that you now find that your children are both offline and online. They're interacting with people in both realms. And so you have to be available to be online and offline with them to help them answer the questions, negotiate the social challenges that they might be facing. And so that, again, is another aspect of transcendence. The other third aspect of transcendent parenting is timeless time, which is that many of the parents I spoke to basically felt that they never stop parenting, because while you're at work, you're communicating with the teacher, while your child is home, you are looking after them, and then after your children go to bed, you're communicating with other parents over parents' WhatsApp chats in order to coordinate schoolwork, in order to coordinate group work, in order to coordinate play dates, and so on. And so it seems like you're parenting all the time, 24/7, 365. So I want to just quickly wrap up to allow for a bit more time for question and answer. But in this particular case, I wanted to share this, where this mother, her child was kind of socially awkward, and she felt that she had to do the due diligence of going into his WhatsApp just to see what kinds of messages he sends, so that he didn't get himself into awkward situations. And so after her son went to bed, she would actually go through his WhatsApp just to make sure that he was behaving himself. And so that's one very good demonstration of how, as parents, you've got to transcend both your child's online and offline social interactions. And then, of course, this is a similar situation. And then another similar situation, the son called the teacher rude names, and so the mother had to intervene, apologize on behalf of the child. And then this one is a particularly interesting one that I think I will share with you. It was a punch up in a school field. So essentially, the kids went to school during recess. A bunch of kids started to play ball. I think there was a scuffle and altercation, and one of the kids ended up sort of physically harming the other one. And so his son came home and had some sort of minor injuries, but the father then wrote an email that was really like an incident report. So it says date, time, venue, location, whatever, right? And so this is what happened, and it was all a misunderstanding and so on. But what's interesting about this father sending an email to the teacher is that it essentially kind of like escalates something that would otherwise have remained within the child's world into the adult world. And because of that ease of communication communication with the teacher, the father then plays a very interesting role of advocacy within the school, vis-a-vis the school, vis-a-vis the teacher. And I do question in my book the implications that this has for children as they grow into autonomous beings, as they acquire independence, whether they will have the opportunity to develop the social skills to negotiate different social situations for themselves. So this is another interesting issue. This one basically is a slide to show you how parents feel quite inundated by the number of notifications. So this mother says, you know, I end up muting it. It's too many messages. It's quite distracting and I need to do other things. But essentially that sort of notification that comes at all hours really requires that parents find that opportunity to decompress, or the parenting time famine just gets so much more exacerbated. So this one I shared with you earlier. And this one, again, you know, it's really about how parents have to be very involved in the reinforcing the child's educational tasks, obligations. I wanted to share this quote with you because this mother says, with the WhatsApp group for the parents, I really feel that I also go to school with them. And so she says, you know, it's like she's the one in the classroom. What's the homework every day? We're part of their studies. And she says, I've had this feeling from some time ago. And then this other mother says, you know, I Google, I watch videos. What I do is I go to YouTube. I sign up for a Facebook group called Learning Out of the Math Box Skills Group. I have to equip myself with a lot of tools in order to help my son do better. And so there is that very concerted exertion of effort in order to really provide as much support as possible to your child's learning. And again, that whole online environments, the communication, the richness of that sort of digitalizing education landscape draws parents much deeper into their children's educational journeys. So this is a parent who says that she doesn't actually want to be in the parents' WhatsApp chats because she found the constant comparison between parents to be very stressful. And she found the amount of information to be overwhelming. And so she said she didn't want to have herself and her children subjected to this kind of peer pressure. And so she withdrew herself from these chats. And similar view from another parent. So just to wrap up, essentially, you can see that parents are kind of in a bind. So for those of you who are not from Singapore, there is this fantastic term called kiasu, which is a Hokkien term, kiasu, which is afraid to lose, pa shu. And the whole kiasu phenomenon, the fear of losing out, very much in many ways helps to capture the parental motivations to help support your kids in the educational journey, because you don't want your kid to be the one who's left behind, right? So casuism, you know, isn't necessarily a bad thing. You really want your kid to be able to keep up. But in this sort of kiasu environment, you know, parents feel even more obligated to play a very involved role. And parents therefore have mixed feelings about these devices because the devices just keep reminding them of how much they have to do and how much more they need to do in order to support their child fully and in order to support their child as much as other parents are supporting their children. And so the norms around what it means to be an involved parent are also shifting as a result of all of these networks, all of these sharing, all of these communication. And so it's very difficult, therefore, in an environment like Singapore's or in other Asian societies that are equally academically oriented to strike a balance between access and access. So is it a global trend? In many other cities, in the city of Chongqing, for example, you'll find that schools are using official WeChat accounts to facilitate teachers' communication with parents. And there are various other examples around the world, not just in China. And interestingly, we might think that the US, people are more chill, but in this particular case, from a book, How to Raise an Adult, this woman's Don's ex-wife calls to tell him to go onto the parents' portal and check what's due in their son's class, to make sure he has turned in all his work and to call the teacher if there's a discrepancy between what their son says he has done and what the online system indicates. Don sighs heavily as he relays this. And this is in the US, where, you know, we imagine that parents might be a little bit more relaxed about educational endeavors, but no, there are also similar platforms that allow for parents to be that involved in their children's studies. So also other examples around the world, but essentially I would venture, having presented my findings across very multinational audiences, that a lot of what I say resonates with many parents in many urban digitalized environments. So I will end off quickly by saying that, you know, parenting is clearly in many ways a universalizing experience, particularly among the middle class, where we share the same desires, the same aspirations, the same anxieties about our capacity as parents, about what we're doing, about whether we're preparing our children sufficiently for the future. So all of these different kinds of shared priorities, along with that sort of common experience in the intensive digitalization of our lives, I think we're going to see more people experience what I call transcendent parenting. So this is my website. If you're curious about my publications, my op-eds and so on, you can find them all there. And I'm very, very happy to take questions at this point.
Thank you, Sansang. Thank you for this wonderful talk. It was very impressive to me and very informative and inspiring. I'm very impressed by a lot of these functions afforded by the technology, the apps, and also the interaction among the triangle interaction among teachers, parents, and the children, not only in the face-to-face like this setting, but also more importantly by the computer and apps. Okay, thank you. And next, we will open our floor for questions. You can either type your question in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and verbally ask the question.
Would you like me to stop screen sharing?
Yeah, sure, you can stop. Any question from our audiences?
Hello.
Okay, Jack.
Hi, hello. Very nice to have lunch together with you virtually.
Yeah. Next time is a proper lunch again.
Yeah. Thank you. Really, I really enjoying the talk, and this reminds me I need to finish reading the book. Okay, it's been on my reading list for a while.
Finish your homework.
Yeah. Yes, but I want to go back to the very beginning. Okay, I think there's I get the main idea of transcendent parenting, but I'd just like to tie this back to the very beginning of your talk. You mentioned domestication theory, right? So what's the relationship between transcendental parenting and domestication theory, which some of the participants here may know the background. Okay, this was initially when TV enters the household. Okay, and later on, you have computer, right? So the family actually is like initially TV or computer were alien species. Okay, and then they were domesticated in the family setting. But what I'm hearing here, there are of course the technological and the social environment is drastically different. And what I'm hearing here is that transcendental parenting is not just the parents, it's just the household, right? So it seems like you are moving the unit of analysis from the family, okay, I would call family actually as a more micro level, to a meso level, right? As at the school, okay, even larger level, or I just want to clarify, is this correct? To see transcendental parenting as an extension and the escalation of domestication theory, and is there something else I'm missing? Yeah.
So I mean, even when I did my field work, it was very much from that sort of lens of technology domestication, right? Because essentially, when you're looking at how household routines, at how the sort of day-to-day priorities are being intensified, but also manifested in how they use the technology. The whole lens of looking at the household as a unit was also situated within that broader ecosystem. So within domestication theory, we also see how there's the process of conversion, right? Which is that the family essentially converts what technology is within their household to also connect with the outer environment. And so within this case, you're right, my original unit of analysis obviously is the household, but you can see that the household is really located within a very dense, complicated network from which they can't extricate themselves. And so parents, even if they want to exclude themselves from parenting WhatsApp chats, they will find that they lose out on a lot of necessary networks that will help them to perform their parenting duties better. And parents who, for example, choose not to communicate with the teachers via all these digital platforms will find that they are disadvantaged. And so, like it or not, I think even while the household is the central focus of analysis, how the household negotiates all these connections with the broader ecosystem, the macro system, is very much also part of the discussion.
Thank you, Sansan.
Thank you. We have one question from the chat box. So Sansan, you can check the chat.
Yes. Just out of curiosity, did you hear any of the parents' feedback that they wish they knew some of these schooling challenges earlier, or if they could be more equipped in any way for this transition into the schooling experience beforehand? I think so. I think, you know, once you are expecting, you know, in Singapore, the conversation always immediately goes to, you know, preschools, goes on to primary school, whether you've got a primary school in mind. And then also now when I see, for example, younger parents, there's enrichment classes for very young children, right? Like, you know, at 6 months or a year, you see kids going for some special swimming classes and all that. And so that sort of discourse around enrichment classes, around having to nurture your child in so many ways, starts very early. And once you start to have those conversations, they necessarily will stray into schooling challenges. Whether parents can be more equipped for this transition into schooling, I think in some ways, preschools do a little bit of that. For example, the preschools now, there is something that they focus on called primary one preparedness, right? Which is how prepared your child is for primary one. And the teachers will actually draw the parents in to get the parents to sort of orientate their children, warm them up to the fact that they're going to move into primary school, that they're going to have to learn how to buy their own food, and so on. So I would say that overall, once anyone in Singapore embarks on the parenting journey, the discourse around the challenges of parenting does become very evident to you. And this is also reflected in the emergence of parenting chat groups, parent WhatsApp, those are Facebook chats, parents WhatsApp chat groups, as well as Telegram groups, as well as Instagram accounts of mommy influencers. So a lot of all these issues around schooling challenges do get raised in these platforms.
Okay,
Hi,
Vincent.
Nice to see you.
Hi, San. Long time no see.
Indeed.
Thanks for your talk. I thought it was very interesting, and for me, it it sort of generated a lot of questions for myself. But I want to ask a question, perhaps quite similar to what Jack had asked just now, but maybe sort of phrased in a different way.
Sure.
Okay, and the question has got to do with the title, Transcendent Parenting. I'm not sure whether the term is used as a technical term within the field, but if you look at the meaning of the term transcendent sort of generically, it sort of connotes that, okay, there's a lot of things going on, but you are transcending. You are sort of, you are over and above these things. Right?
No.
Okay. So I've got the meaning wrong, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that was actually a kind of like issue I had with my editor, because she said that it sounded very spiritual.
In a certain sense, it sort of connotes that despite all that's going on, parents have found a way to decouple, from all these activities, and sort of over and above these things. But
No, not at all.
as opposed to that, yeah, I mean, what you were saying from the talk is that parents seem, in fact, to even be more involved. So rather than transcendent, it's more of like ubiquitous parenting.
I guess if you wanted a less a more value neutral term, you might say, you know, traversing, that you're able to you have to traverse all these environments. So my editor actually wanted me to call it digital parenting, which somebody then said that's so 80s, which I totally agreed. And to me, I really wanted to use the term transcendent because it really does capture how I felt. I didn't mean it in that spiritual way, which is that, you know, you're above it all, that you are able to deal with all of these stresses. I meant to transcend in the sense that you have to be in so many places at the same time. So you have to transcend that physical distance between yourself and your child. You've got to transcend your child's online and offline worlds. You've got to transcend all of this timeless time. And so that really was what I referred to. And I do unpack it in quite great detail in the book. I don't think I could do it with full justice today, but I hope to be able to convince you that I don't mean it in that Zen-like, you know, we are above it all way, because that is not what my findings reveal.
Yeah, actually, I'm just imagining what someone like Barry Wellman would say. He talks about online and offline, that we should think about it in terms of them being integrated, as opposed to this versus that, you know. So what you're saying here is that, you know, it's really the digital parenting in the context of everyday life, and you can't really escape it.
Correct.
Right?
So it is very integrated. Actually.
Yeah, so it's actually much more integrated than sort of transcending. So that's basically my question.
Right. So I guess you know, it's a matter of choice. You feel more accurately represents it. But I would say your observation about the integration on the online offline really applies to the parents. Yeah. Because, you know, when you think about the parents' WhatsApp chat, so once your child gets enrolled in a primary school or a preschool, immediately somebody will start a parents' WhatsApp chat, right? Yeah. And suddenly you are so well connected with all these parents whom you might previously never have interacted with, except for the 2-3 minutes when you went to pick up your child at the same time. Now suddenly everyone is online together. And in the book, you will actually find instances where there were disputes between children, not just the one that I showed you. There were disputes within children that escalated within the parents' WhatsApp chat. Parents actually started to argue, and then parents in the group started to take sides. Some of them took screenshots of previous posts to share with the parents who were wronged, and so on. And so that whole fusion, the whole conflation on the offline and online really became, you know, very, very rife within this sort of digitalized parenting space.
Which sort of underscores to me that you really, really cannot escape any of it. Yeah. You know, But I was also curious about something else, if I could ask very quickly. You know, so it's a continuum. You have a lot of support on one hand, but you also have a lot of social control, social comparison sort of going on. From the policy point of view, are there any ways to curb the excesses? So you don't want to sort of swing to either end. Correct. You want to, you know, there are benefits, you want to acknowledge them. But you also don't want to go the other side, and it becomes like a 24/7 monitoring, surveillance all the time. And then I can imagine the pressure on the kids and the parents would be enormous. Yeah. Thanks.
So from the policy perspective, I think it's important for ministries, for principals to set some best practices, some norms and standards by which teachers should hopefully abide. So that, and also don't forget the stress on the teachers too, right? You're one teacher with 35 kids, with 35 parents to deal with, you're just inundated as well. So basically for everyone's well-being, it's important that we have some OB markers drawn around the extent of communication, the requirements around responsiveness, the requirements around intensity and frequency of communication. And I do think that this is something that needs to be a little bit more, that more attention needs to be paid to it in terms of setting norms and standards. So that I think is the closest we have. And COVID hasn't helped, right? because with
Yes.
us moving online even more,
Yeah.
going digital just seems to be a very
Yes.
natural extension.
Yes.
And so that actually has only intensified the digital
Agree.
activity.
Agree. Thanks.
Thanks. We have another question from Shu Hu.
Hi, Prof. Lin.
there.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. My questions are kind of related to the questions raised by Vincent. So in your talk, you already kind of talked about the pressure this type of intensive digital parenting put on parents themselves, how it kind of interfere with their work time, work life. And you also talked about the pressure on children, or rather the limitation as to the chance for children to negotiate in their own world and to grow capability to deal with their own life problems, issues. So my question is more in this regard. I would like to hear more of your thoughts on the implications of this type of digital intensive parenting on social inequality, because obviously there's a class dimension. Depending on the parents' work commitment and demands, they have different, they are in different capacity to be involved in this school home alliance in educating the children. And the other side of the inequality dimension is gender. I noticed that many of the quotes in your presentation came from mothers. So obviously it's mothers who are heavily involved in this. So I'm wondering about the implication on women's career development. And my last question is, if a struggling middle-class parent who doesn't really agree with the direction this is going, and if a working-class parent who is unable to participate fully in this school parent interaction involvement, asks you for advice how they can deal with these challenges, what would you say to them? Thank you.
Right. Thanks. Those are some really interesting questions and important ones too. I mean, the whole issue of inequality clearly is being played out even more actively now during COVID, right? When we see how the home-based learning has become the norm, and we see how with online learning platforms, there are all kinds of challenges. So when the circuit breaker, the lockdown in Singapore happened, I had to do various webinars with various audiences to help them manage the work from home plus home-based learning type of situation. People were feeling very stressed. People were feeling very overwhelmed by the excessive screen time. And you could see that among parents who were less digitally adept, that they felt much more daunted by the situation, because clearly, you know, with every new learning platform, you have to set up a different account. Every account needs a password and so on. And there were parents saying that, look, you know, I don't even know these platforms. And now I have to be the one to be the supporting, the teaching assistant to help my child through all of these different classes. So similarly, whether it is homeschool conferencing or whether it is homework helpers, parents who are less well-resourced, parents who are less educated will definitely be less able to take advantage of all of these different kinds of resources and networks in order to support their children. And that has very clear implications for our digital literacy education in Singapore. And it also has very clear implications for issues around digital access. So in Singapore, we saw even in lockdown issues of digital inequality, where families had to be loaned laptops or donated laptops and so on. And there were also families that didn't have their own internet access. And even those who had access maybe didn't have the right skills, right? And so these are all the kinds of inequalities that we need to be addressing, that we need to be bridging. So just a teaser, at the end of this month, I will be on another webinar by the Social Services Research Center at NUS. We are going to be talking about universal digital access that relates to these kinds of digital inequalities. But I fully agree with you that in a digitalizing educational environment, less educated parents will be further left behind, and their children as well as a result. So the second question pertaining to women, that's another very clear issue, right, that has blown up. And in fact, one of my reviewers asked me why I did not call the book Transcendent Mothering if most of the people I interviewed were mothers. Actually, we asked to speak to either parents, but eventually it was always the mothers, mostly mothers who participated because they tended to be more involved in the child's schoolwork. And this very much reflects that overall inequality in the caring burden, that mothers still bear a disproportionate share of the load. And but I chose nevertheless to call my book Transcendent Parenting because there is an aspirational dimension to it. If I call it Transcendent Mothering, then we're going to always be the ones doing the parenting, right? But if you view it in a more gender neutral way, and I know with mobile communication, you know, parents becoming more drawn in on all fronts, that fathers can actually be drawn into the parenting equation a little bit more. And actually this allows me to answer Vincent's question again a bit more completely, which is that the other terrible norm in Singapore is that schools and teachers almost invariably communicate with the mothers rather than the fathers. And immediately, without any kind of choice or volition, the mothers are the ones carrying that educational burden for the child. And so that is another policy issue that needs to be addressed to equalize the picture. So your last question was about what advice I would give to middle-class parents. I would say that, you know, learn how to manage the devices and notifications to the point that it helps you. If it feels in any way inundating or stressful, learn to find pockets of time where you're feeling calmer and you're prepared to deal with these kinds of school-related communication. Don't allow all these apps and notifications to take over your life and to raise that stress level. By all means, use them strategically and try not to be too immersed in them. That would be my survival strategy.
Okay, thank you. So we have one last question from Agnes. Maybe we can finish this one real quick. Agnes?
Oh yeah, yeah. Actually, I have two questions, and my first question is the same with Dr. Hu, and you have already answered that maybe some lower educated parents or some parents from lower FES families, they may not fully participate in the digital parenting. That will not, yes, yeah. And my second question is that as we know, there's a phenomenon called parentocracy in Singapore. So I would like to know whether you think this kind of digital parenting will further reinforce this kind of phenomenon. As you mentioned that in the interview, some parents already mentioned that in the media group or the WeChat group or the WhatsApp group, parents there will some competition between their children. So I wonder whether this the competition or this kind of platform can really enforce parents to be more intensive or to encourage their children to work harder or yeah to really enforce this kind of phenomenon. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. I also talk about parentocracy in the book, and I refer to how, you know, there are clearly all these opportunities for parents now to perform their parenting prowess, you know, and among the parents chat groups, there will be those parents who are like the super moms, super dads, right? So they are the ones who are always the most well-informed. If anyone asks a question like, what's the spelling list for tomorrow? They're the first to send it out. And these are always the ones who are really very in the know. And then the other parents, as like the one I showed you the example of at the end, you know, the one who says, it's too much for me, I don't want to be drawn into that. You do see some parents resisting this sort of overwhelming peer pressure. But generally, there is a lot of performativity in these kinds of chats. I know that the situation in China becomes even more interesting, and my next book is actually about China. What happens is that they have chats where the teacher is in the chat. And so among the parents, there is a very concerted effort to perform how grateful they are to the teacher, and then they will praise the teacher in a very floral way, just to win the teacher's favor, so that the teacher will take good care of their children and so on. So there's even more interesting manifestations of that kind of performative parenting in other cities.
Okay, thank you, Prof.
Thank you. So we are running out of time. So maybe we have to stop here. And once again, thank you, Professor Sang Samling, for this wonderful talk. I believe many of us have learned a lot and enjoyed this session so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Have
Thanks.
a good weekend. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.